Welcome to the second part of the presentation launching the Tribes of Ammonia Y-DNA project. In this part, we'll look at how Y-DNA can be used practically to break through those brick walls in our genealogical research that we often encounter in the early 1800s when the records kind of dry up. Now, we're unlikely to identify named ancestors, but we can learn a lot about the origins and history of our ancestors and our surnames before 1800. As I explained in the first part of the presentation, we'll use Y-DNA for this research, and Y-DNA is passed down the male or surname line from father to son almost unchanged, aside for some slight changes or mutations every few generations. Just to do a quick recap then on these types of mutations. So the first being an SMP or a SNP, which is where a single letter on our DNA changes forever. And this is a very stable but also a more expensive type of mutation to test. The second type of mutation is an STR, which is a number of repeating sequences in a segment of our DNA. And over the centuries, the number of repeats at a certain location can change back and forth, but they are useful in the initial grouping stages. It's basically the first thing that we do within the project. So we look at these STR values and we compare them against the other members in the project, and we create genetic groupings. Now this table here is an extract from the Glennon Y-DNA Project. It shows different patterns in genetic signatures in the different groups. The Glennon Y-DNA Project was one of the first surname projects to be set up when family tree DNA began testing Y-DNA and hosting these projects. So it was set up by Clark Glennon, an Irish American who was exploring his own ancestry and discovered Y-DNA. It was a very new thing at the time. And like many others, Clark became a project administrator and began recruiting Glennons from all over Ireland and all throughout the diaspora across the world into the project in order to kind of figure out how we all were related to one another and kind of reconnect with his own roots in Ireland. So what Clark quickly discovered was that when he started grouping the Glennons, he saw that each regional Glennon group was unrelated to one another, completely distinct origins to one another. So it's clear and it's clear here in the table, you can see in the pattern of the DNA. And not only was he able to say that the different regional groups had separate origins, but he also began to identify subgroups within the different regional surname groups. So he could break them down and begin to build a kind of a family tree, a genetic family tree. I was incredibly fortunate when I came into the project 2 years ago that Clark had built up such a broad membership and developed testing to a level where once the advanced technology had come along in the last few years, so I just had to recruit a few more members from each group and then bump up to the most advanced test. And this where we're really able to refine the branching points, so data branching points, and identify a fuller kind of picture of the Glennon family tree. Before we look at the family tree DNA tools, and just a quick reminder that this advanced testing uses SNPs to map out the branches of a given lineage. So a new branch of the family is created every time there is a new SNP mutation. And as the diagram shows here that we looked at in the first part of the presentation, so the T mutation in man 1 created a new branch or lineage, and a C mutation in the great-grandson of man 3 creates a new branch as well. Now, because DNA mutates at a relatively predictive rate, if we have enough testers and data, we can then calculate the date that the branches occur. Okay, and one of the ways the branching is visualized is using the family tree time tree. So this is the family tree for the Roscommon and Galway Glennons. It should be noted that this tool is better for visualizing the breakup and the branching of the different families, not so good for dating the branches using the time scale at the top. So you can see here in the top left that we have a BY11841. So that's just a name that's given to the SMP. So here, every time two testers are confirmed to have a particular SNP, then the SNP is given a name. So all these numbers here above the red and blue circles are basically just the SNP's name, its designation. So the top left corner, as I said, 11841, that's the overarching Roscommon and Galway Glennon DNA marker. So all the Glennons in this lineage have that marker. There's just three other testers in Galway, Roscommon on the borders, from around Clonfad, Kiltull area, and they have their separate lineage. But every other Galway, Roscommon, Glennon has this particular marker, and then they descend into their separate branches from that point. So you can see up in the top here, we've got one branch, and these all become the Roscommon, what we call the Roscommon Glennons, although there is one branch in Glensk, which is just inside Galway. And then the second branch, these are all Galway Glennons. So we've got Williamstown, Denairy, Kilreekle, and these are only the advanced testers that are plotted on the time tree. The less, the lower tested ones aren't featured here. And here is the family tree block tree, so family tree DNA block tree. This is a better way of working out the branching points and the dates at which different branches form. You can see at the side here, so we've worked out calculating using SNPs. So if we take it that as family tree DNA advises, so on average, a SNP will occur every 83 years. So we can use that to calculate how many SNPs are in the overall group, and then use calculations to work out the date of each branching point. So that's what we've done here. And you can identify the origins of the name. So the earliest point this Glennon marker occurs is estimated to be about 1161 AD using this method. Then in about between 1388, it is for this group. It's calculated as 1471 for this group. So it's in and around that. We're never going to get an exact figure for DNA. It's based on probability, but as long as we have enough testers in a haplo group and we have enough data, then we can fairly accurately estimate the time of a particular branching point. So in here is going to be in and around, so sometime between 1380, 1470, thereabouts. Two branches form. So these become all the what we call the Roscommon branch, and these become the Galway branch. But the most dramatic thing that happens in this group is approximately in the mid-17th century. So it's estimated to be 1637 AD for both groups here, but we have had advanced results for John Glennon Pallea North, and that adds an extra SNP. So that's going to push back this 1637 date slightly, but it's still in and around, as I say, it's a ballpark figure, and it just allows us to focus our research. But at that point, mid-17th century, all these Glennons branch off from one another. So on the Roscommon side, you've got Athleague Shrara, one branch, got Top McConnell Moor, another branch, Glennon Village, another branch, and then here you've got two branches. So you can see it says private variants. That just means that both of these testers are separate branches. So we've got Castle Sampson and we've got Glensk. So among these Roscommon Glennons, we've got 5 different lineages, all of which branch off in the mid-17th century, thereabouts. And again, on the Galway side, we've got 2 lineages that branch off around this time. Okay, so let's visualize that then on a map. A map from johngrenham.com. So this is a great resource for doing genealogy and surname research. But basically, I've merged all the different variations in spelling of the Glennons onto these maps. And what we see here in the red dots is the concentrations of Glennons in those particular parishes. So the size of the dot obviously is the larger number of Glennons. And then the black circles are the genetic clusters. So we're highlighting the genetic clusters among these different groups. So here we've got the Tishrara Athleague group. Here we've got the Glennon Village group, which is on the border between Glenvoy and Hara. We've got a Kiltoon Sampson group. We've got a Top McConnell Moore group. And then over in Galway, we've got the Glensk group, which branches off from Roscommon Glennons, and Temple Toher group, which branches off from that separate two lineage branch. So we've got three identifiable genetic clusters in Galway County. As I've mentioned already, we've got the Glensk crew here, we've got the Temple Toher, Offaly, North and South crew here. We've also got Tina and Denairi, Kilreekle, and another tester with origins in Leitrim, Leitrim parish that is. So we can see that there's identifiable larger clusters. So these are Temple Toher, the main cluster. We've got Denairi and then surrounding clusters. And we've got Clare Galway. Now we haven't had a Glennon, genetic Glennon tester in Clare Galway, but we do have them in Denairi and Temple Toher. But then the rest, all the other groups are quite spread out. So there's ones and twos in most places elsewhere. But if we while the Temple Toher and the Denairi Glennons appear to be two branches that separate in 1650 or thereabouts like the rest, when we compare their SDRs, they're actually very similar. So they've got 7 common SDRs that the rest of the group don't have. So that indicates that they are the same lineage. What we need to figure out now is whether they're descended, all these southern Galway Glennons are descended from the Williamstown Glennons, which kind of the SDR DNA is indicating, or whether they did indeed branch off from around to Boy, Top McConnell at the same time directly to around the South Galway, Denairi area. And that's what we need to broaden the testing on the Galway side for that. 7 different lineages of Glennons all branched off in the mid-17th century. So how can we explain that? What was happening at that time? Well, one of the biggest upheavals in Irish history was the Cromwellian Transplantations of the mid-17th century. So in 1641 there was a rebellion by the Irish. They formed a Confederate government, Kilkenny, which subsequently sided with the Crown, King Charles, in the Civil War against the parliamentarian forces under Cromwell. Cromwell mobilized an army with limited funds. He paid them partially, but also promised them land once he was victorious as a remainder of their payment. In 1649, then he deployed to Ireland, quelled the rebellion. And then the administration decided that in order to both pay the soldiers and prevent any further rebellions, that they would implement a transplantation of Ireland. So all those Catholic landowners, those who didn't actively support the parliamentarian cause in the war, were to be removed from Munster, Leinster and Ulster and given smaller plots of land in a large part of Connacht, so Mayo, Roscommon, Galway and Clare, which is part of Connacht at the time. Obviously this was a complex scheme to execute, and it took quite a lot of planning. One of the aspects of the transplantation that particularly affected East Galway and South Roscommon was a scheme known as the Shannon Security Zone. So this was a plan to remove all Catholic landowners from a 3-mile zone along the west side of the Shannon. Now, while this was very difficult to implement in the end and was never fully executed, it did result in a large displacement of Catholic landowners and, as we'll see, tenants from South Roscommon and southeast Galway, further into Connacht, particularly around northwest Galway, and into Mayo and west Roscommon. So around Kiltulla, Glennon Glensk, Ballymoe, we see particularly a lot of settlers moving there. This was obviously a massive undertaking, the transplantation, so it needed quite a large mapping project. So George Petty was deployed to undertake this survey and basically mapped every townland in the country with incredible precision. And what came out of it were a series of down survey maps and the books of survey and distribution, which basically recorded everyone who had lands in 1641 and who had them, who was granted them and held the lands in 1670. So it's a great resource for understanding this transition between 1641 and then the post-transplantation era. But it's often it gives us it just shows us how much of a transformation it was. That in 1641 it was very much still clan territories. So you could see in Clontuskert, the Coffeys had extensive land there, they were decimated, so they had very little when it came to 1670. Same for the Fallons in Clonuddock around Dysart and Cam. And several other, the Kellys again, their lands were massively reduced during the transplantations. So all these, and the Maddens. So we've got all these different clans that were perfectly identifiable in 1641, are now spread throughout Connacht and further afield. And that's in many ways that's why it's often termed the end of Ireland, this transplantation era. What was going on at the time, but more specifically for the Glennons and the lands that they clearly occupied at the time, what was going on there. So one Cromwellian soldier in particular was given large estates at the centre of the Glennon clusters around Toboy, Dysart and Northern Top McConnell. He's called Michael Stanley. So if we take a look at the records altogether, so the books of survey and distributions and the land grants under the Act of Settlement, we can see the full extent of the land he acquired. So as well as the principal estate in the centre of kind of the main Glennon clusters, he was granted land in Kilnvoy on the kind of perimeter, and on also in Pole Redmond, just outside Williamstown in North Galway. Focus on each of these kind of estates in turn. So where in particular was he given land in Pole Redmond? Well, the Trinity College Dublin undertook a scheme a few years ago to map all the data, all the information in a down survey, which is an incredibly useful tool for this type of research. And in particular, they identify the townlands of Palia North and Palia South as those lands granted to Michael Stanley. And these are 35 kilometres away from the main estate down into Boy, Dysart, Top McConnell. And importantly for our particular research, they're the sites of two of our testers' earliest known ancestors. So we've got John Glennon has his earliest known ancestors go all the way to Palia North, and they don't know of any ancestors before that. Their family was always in Palia North as far as they're aware, and it doesn't cross over with any other Glennon families in the area. In the meantime, Packlin and Palia South, again, his lineage goes all the way back, and they've been in Palia South as far as the family can remember. So both of those families those lineages branch off in the mid-17th century according to Y-DNA, and both are in townlands that were granted to Michael Stanley 35 kilometres away from his main estate in Taboy, Dice, or Top McConnell. So what are the chances of that happening, of these two lineages branching off in 1650 around the same time that he's granted land there, and still being there today? So there has to be a correlation, basically. But what about the other lands granted to Stanley? Is there any correlation between these and the Glennon locations? Well, another smaller estate granted to Michael Stanley was in Killenvoy, but is there any Glennon branches off there? Well, first we want to confirm that Stanley actually took up these lands in Killenvoy, because although they were granted to him in 1666, they're not recorded in books of survey and distribution in 1670. So why is that, and how can we confirm it? Well, we need to delve into the labyrinth of the registry of deeds. This is a wordy slide, but we just want to pick out the key bits out of these two memorial deeds. Now, there's no possible way I could have come up with the goods on this part of the research. I was lucky enough that Nuala Farrell Griffin had just sent her latest book to print about Kilbegnett House and the Shield family, and I just managed to email her pretty much a day after. Instead of telling me to get lost, that she needed a well-deserved break, she threw herself into the research and did a couple of days. In a couple of days, she had done what I couldn't do in probably a couple of years. So here we have two deeds that Nuala discovered. First is a memorial from 1710, where Michael Stanley passes his estate, including Cullenvoy, to his grandson Michael. So all the townland names are spelt slightly differently, but they're still identifiable as the same townland estates as in the grants. The second memorial, though, then confirms it. So this is one from 1724, which shows Michael's wife, Elizabeth, now remarried. She grants an annuity or an annual payment of £100 to her son, Reverend John Hill, from the estate, including Killenvoy and Caron Dwasley. So again, that's Caron Drossy. So these are two townlands listed in the initial grant, of course. So he did take up the lands, but is there a correlation with the Glennons? The down survey maps comes in. We can see that what was Killenvoy in the down survey has now been split into Killenvoy and Kellybrook further over here. So, and again, right on the edge of this townland is what becomes Glennon Village. So this is just south of Knacrockery, on the kind of borderland between Rahara Parish and Killenvoy. So this is a village. So Glennon's Village is recorded in the 1829 to 41 Ordnance Survey maps. It's understood that it housed around 6 Glennon families at one time, but by the time the Land Commission distributed land in the 1920s, last of the Glennons were moved out, and sadly it's just ruins and undergrowth now. But again, we have two testers whose ancestors originated in Glennon's Village, both branching off in the mid-17th century, and both on land immediately beside where Michael Stanley had another estate. So as well as his main estate around Taboy, at the heart of the Glennon clusters, Stanley has land in Palea, 35 miles away, where Glennons emerge after having branched off at this time, and again in Killenvoy, adjacent to Glennon's Village. Are there any other links? Well, there is one. It's slightly more tenuous than the other ones, but again, that cluster that we have in Athleague and Tishrara, well, we see that Michael Stanley also has an association with Athleague. There's no land grants in Athleague parish, but in the 1659 census, again conducted by Petty while he was doing the down survey, we can see that Michael Stanley was a titulado, so an unofficial landholder in Athleague parish. And what's interesting about this is, on this page alone, we've got Michael Stanley Again, Titulado in Athleague. We've got a Robert Stanley, a couple of miles away in Ballinasloe in Purity. And we've got Edmund Ormsby, well-known landlord in, so he's in Tubervady. So in all these townlands identified as the only ones that have titulados, of course these all have castles or fortifications in them, which are deemed to be in ruins at the time, but it's just a sign of how insecure the Cromwellian settlers and soldiers felt at the time, that they had to occupy fortifications and castles. So they obviously had garrisons. You can see that when it numbers how many English. So Michael Stanley has 10 English in Athleague, Ballinasloe, so Robert has 3, and Ormsby has 7 in Ballinasloe. So they're likely small garrisons, small troops of horse. So Michael Stanley, he started out as a cornet, so which is the lowest rank in Cromwell's cavalry. But later in Bethlem's extracts in the genealogy office, he's referred to as a commandant of horse. So he's clearly moving up the ranks, and that would kind of be supported by the fact that he's garrisoning in Athleague. Stanley was a member of quite an illustrious family, but on a separate branch. So the Stanleys had fought on both sides at the Battle of Shrewsbury, the Battle of the Two Henrys in 1402, 1403. And then he's a separate branch, became the Earls of Derby and titular Kings of the Isle of Man. Now that particular branch sided with King Charles in the Civil War, whereas Michael Stanley, obviously being on a less fortunate side of the family, decided to roll the dice and rode in with Cromwell and the parliamentarian forces, and clearly came out on top because he was granted all these lands in Roscommon and Galway. He was given large estate in Tipperary, and ultimately also came into land in Westmeath as well. He also had a residence in Warborough Street in Dublin as well. That together, we can see that Michael Stanley had a main estate in Tiboy, Dicer, Top McConnell, but then has additional smaller estates in Templetoher, where a Glennon group branches off in mid-17th century. He's got another small estate in Kilnvoy, where again Glennon's village emerges, and genetic testers that again branched off at the same time period. And he's also titulado in Athleague in 1659, where we've got another group on the borders to Shrara Athleague. What exactly is happening? Why are all these branches forming at this time? Well, one explanation is that the population of Ireland had been decimated in the preceding decade, 2 decades. So the population of Ireland had dropped by about a quarter through famine, disease, and war. So it's likely that a lot of the lands were untenanted. It's possible that the landlords were redistributing their tenants to make their lands as profitable as possible, obviously. And that's something that comes through if you look at the activities of landlords right through the centuries. That seems to often be the case, and it was Paul McGlennon from Loughrea that kind of got me onto this line of thinking at the start, because that's happened. He's kind of come across that in his research as well, like where families are moved around quite regularly between estates. So there's probably a lot of reasons for that. One being that certain lands have become unoccupied and that we need to move new tenants on there. Second one is that certain trades were needed, so estates couldn't really operate without, for instance, a farrier, blacksmiths, trades like that. And among the family traditions, particularly Templetoher Glennons, is that their ancestors were farriers on the Lowbury estate, which is just north of Templetoher. And when we look at the Dunmore Glennons, who haven't tested yet, but again they're all their records indicate that they were hereditary blacksmiths around this period. So generation after generation of the records of blacksmiths. And then when I went to visit Kilconnell for another branch of the Glennons, again they had the same family tradition. Without mentioning any of this, they've come up with the same family tradition that their ancestors were farriers on an estate. So there's clearly a strand going through this. So it's possible that at least one of the branches, maybe the ones that come to Temple Toher and then filtered through to other parts of Galway, that they were brought over as a further trade, whether it's farriers or blacksmiths. But there's also others. There's other possible explanations as well. For instance, if certain tenants or certain families were disruptive, sometimes they'd be moved to different estates to prevent any further kind of rebelliousness. But realistically, the DNA doesn't tell us this until we kind of find written records. We can't say for certain. What's all say about the Glennons pre-plantation, or do we have any other records that can link back to just before the plantations? Well, we've got a Sheriff Rolls record from 1629. This research was done by Paul McCotter, who wrote an exceptional book about medieval territories of Ireland, medieval Ireland, territorial, political and economic divisions, which is an exceptional book and will be used a lot in our research in terms of the different clan territories. So when he's done this research for Clark very early on in the project, found this record. So it's a Sheriff's Court. Sheriff's Roll record, Sheriff's Court, Barney of Athlone before Richard Lane, Sheriff of Roscommon. A case where Ambrose O'Madden and Dermot O'Lennan committed assault and battery on each other. But those listed as failing to appear for jury service are Donagh McGlennon and Gilpatrick McGlennon, both to Boy parish, again at the heart of where Stanley was granted his estate. And then his initial name, first name is unreadable, and then it's McGlennon, and what appears to be Kilnear parish, but it's possibly Kilmaine. So we can see then that there was certainly Glennons into Boy pre-plantation, and they weren't planted in. There's other records that kind of indicate that the Glennons were in this region for quite a while. In Owen Conlon's version of the Annals of the Four Masters, so it's a single volume version, published in the mid 19th century, but it had an accompanying topographical and historical map, so pointing out the territories possessed by the princes, lords, chiefs and clans mentioned in the course of the Annals, and in Moycarn he's listed O'Glennon. But frustratingly, he doesn't actually explain in the text why he's placed O'Glennon there. And again, MacLyset identifies MacGlennon. Another name similar anglicized is Macgilla Enan, and Ammonia Sept also anglicized Glennon. So there's all different spellings, but we know from the DNA that all these range of spellings actually they all are the same genetic clan. The last record then we're going to look at then is this is a letter from the Dennis H. Kelly papers in the John Rylands Library in Manchester, where it's a letter from John O'Donovan, so famous antiquarian and author of the Tribes and Customs of Imonia. And he's here listed. This is when he was doing his research for the Ordnance Survey. He's listed the different tribes, several different tribes of Imonia and the surnames associated with them. And then Clonflahool is listed with Macgillenan. But at the end of it, this is where we're at the same time. He's asked, are the names of these districts remembered and their families to be still found in Hymany? So this is where we're at. So we want to identify which clans different surnames belong to, and which surnames are still in the region and can trace their origins all the way back to these clans, and see what relationship there is between the different clans, so that we can learn more about our own ancestry and origins, and also learn more about the Kingdom of Ui Maine and its medieval history. Okay, that concludes the second part of this presentation. First part will hopefully have given you an idea of how Y-DNA can be used to explore the early origins and history of our surnames, to identify connections with other surnames and lineages in the clan and surname era, and to better understand the genetic heritage of the region and the tribes of Ui Maine. This second part then should have shown you how Y-DNA can be used in the more recent past to break through those brick walls in the 1800s, to understand more about our history of our ancestors and the distribution of our surnames down through the centuries. As the project progresses, we'll focus on different tribes, different surnames, to explore how Y-DNA can be used to explore their origins and history. For those with ancestors in the region, I hope you'll join us on this journey in the Tribes of Ui Maine project. Thanks a lot for watching. Gur Maith.